It's like, man.
Yeah,
So that you would get kicked out.
I know.
well played.
Yeah. Thank you.
I look forward to hearing the story.
That's from like 1987, bro.
We decided no.
Not joking.
I'll be jealous.
87.
Maybe 86.
First, we're gonna get sick on that one. So
That's my bag.
First, we're gonna get sick on that one, so he won't let me go there anymore.
Well, it is getting higher.
I don't think either one of us knows how it originated.
There's things, there's other things that add all your
Welcome to the Wednesday, October 11th, 2017 work session of the Richmond Community Schools Board of School Trustees. Please stand for the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we'll have the reading of the mission statement.
Richmond Community Schools guide students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
Thank you, Brad. And the vision statement.
Richmond Community Schools, a community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for life of choice, purpose, and service.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
And now we're ready for public commentary. Are none? All right, we'll move on then to consent items.
Okay, this evening you have before you our approval of minutes as well as our human resource information for your consideration this evening.
Okay, do you hear a motion that we approve the consent items?
I so moved.
Jeff makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Suzanne seconds it. Any comments or questions?
No, there's no agenda.
Which is a good thing.
Very good thing.
Okay,
Want to make sure we didn't miss anything.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now for action items.
Our first action item, the first two actually are policy issues. So Mrs. Robinson, I'll turn those over to you.
Okay, for the first one, it's the second reading and adoption of policy records access to public disclosure and the fee schedule for copies, which we got accomplished. So do I hear a motion that we approve the second reading and adopt?
I so move.
Brad makes the motion. Do I hear a second? Jeff seconds it. Any comments or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The second one is policy 3121, which was the criminal history information, and this was an addition to that policy about payment of background checks. And I had Jennifer send you how much it would cost if we were doing 1/5 of our employees, because it would be a 5-year rotation. Is that correct, Jennifer?
That's correct.
Okay.
And what was the number? $3,200?
It was
Around 35.
$3,500. So
I personally, I agree with the hiring that the employee pays for it, but I personally don't have a problem with the corporation picking up the cost after the fact.
Same boat. I think initially it's a good faith on their part to do the application, so showing that they're serious. But as much as we ask from our employees, and as much as education's changed and more is on their plate, anytime we can take one less thing off them, I think we need to do that.
well, I know there's more and more training. They have to do the 6 hours every 5 years. They have to pay for a renewal of a license. So
That's my point exactly. It's
kind
I think the other thing we need to remember too, it's not just for the certified.
It's for everybody.
So I think for the non-certified employees who are typically at the lower end of our pay scales across the district, I think a big concern is for them as well.
I would agree
I mean,
with
it's
that.
only $21.95 or whatever it was, but it's, I think that it's just goodwill from us.
I think it's good faith.
Well, and I think we're kidding ourselves if Jennifer isn't going to have to keep track of it anyway.
That was the question I had is,
mean-
which is easier in the management perspective?
So. I
Because
mean,
even if we pay, you're still gonna have to, I'm assuming you're gonna have to get, them to sign something granting you permission to get the background check, or can you just do it
They-
without their permission?
No, they have to complete it online,
Okay,
and that's regardless of whether they pay or we pay.
okay.
So there could be a caveat, if you don't fill it out online, then you pay for it by a certain date. How's that?
You have to fill it out online regardless.
Well, I know, but
And
what
you'd
I'm-
have to chase it down, because you have to have
What
it,
I'm
it's
saying is,
required,
Send
so.
them a notice that if
Oh,
you have it
that-
filled out online by April 1st, then the corporation picks it up. After that, you pick it up.
Well, the law says if you don't do it within that amount of time, that you don't work here anymore.
Well, that's even
There's
better.
always, there's always
There's that.
There's always
Then we'll
that.
penalize them another
Yeah,
$21.
There's always that.
That's insult to injury.
Well, does someone want to,
The other part of that, though, too, Jennifer, I think I understood you to say, if we pay for it, we own the background check. If they pay for it, they own the background check. And theoretically, they could take it and use it somewhere else. Is that true? Doesn't really change my opinion. I just know
Your
that that's the
answer.
difference.
Is that- She said yes.
Yeah. I
I'll
mean,
do-
they could request a copy and pay the public disclosure fee.
okay, so do I hear a motion that,
I would make the motion that we take this to first reading with the corporation picking up the cost of because this goes to first reading, right? Or second reading, I'm sorry.
No, this is a
No.
correction
This
to
is
the
just a
previous
correction.
Oh,
sheet
okay.
approved.
So it goes, but it will go to first reading.
Does it
No,
need to
this would be an
mod-
adoption.
Does it
It'll
need
be
to be
an immediate
modified at
adoption.
all
Mm-hmm.
to state that the corporation pays for it, or?
That's right, because we approved it to come back to, didn't we? That's right. You're right. So I'll make the motion that we make the correction that.
okay? Do you hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Aaron seconds it. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Before we move to the next action item, this is just for the record on policies. About 2 years ago, as of next month, the board agreed that we would have ISBA review our policy manual. When printed, this takes up more than a 3-inch notebook. It took ISBA, more specifically Julie Slavens, nearly 16 months to complete this job. She was very thorough, and this was an enormous task. This April, Julie sent back recommended deletions because the policies were old, did not reflect current law, or were covered by law and not needed. She also sent deletions and additions within our policies to update them. She sent new policies to comply with recent legislation, and she sent recommendations for policies we didn't have. It then became the board's job to choose from different samples of policies she sent us. We also needed to review all the policies for current practice and then adopt the needed changes, additions, deletions, and the new policies. This has taken 6 months of work by the board. It also became a true team effort by everyone sitting at this table and then some. The cabinet and our school attorney helped answer many, many questions. They helped research common practice here in Richmond. They helped with wording and organization. And I can't say enough about the work Kim Claypool, our administrative secretary, did in all of this. She's the one that kept everything organized, and this was a giant task. I want to publicly thank all of you for helping the board in this endeavor. It was a huge job, and it took everyone working together to get it finished. I sincerely appreciate everyone's willingness to work on this, including the work done by board members. Everyone graciously helped out whenever asked. Now it is time for the administration to align the administrative guidelines with the board policies. This will be another big job. But this meeting completes the update of our board policy manual, and now we can move on to other work. In closing, I can say that this is a board and an administration that has really read the policy manual, and that has meant hundreds and hundreds of pages. Imagine the work this required of Julie Slavens. Again, thanks to everyone for the completion of our most important function of board work.
Well said.
If I could add something to that, Dixie. Speaking with Julie last week, she was happy to have done the work for us because that's part of her responsibility, but she was very appreciative of the fact that we diligently not only accepted her recommendations but even dug a little deeper. But most important thing, she received a letter from the board thanking her for that. She says even now that letter in itself of appreciation was more than anything that she could have received. It brought her to tears and does every time that she reads it. So
Ron?
Never fear, Julie's retaliating. She's asked me to be a presenter at the next ISBA. I'm not sure I can. I may have a conflict, but if not, I will.
get rid of that conflict.
And I did today send her a copy of this, and she sent a reply that she is going to use us as an example in the state of good teamwork working toward updating a complete policy manual.
Nice.
Nice.
Okay. And now we're ready for 5.03.
Okay, our next 3 action items actually are all field trips, overnight field trips. So I'm going to ask Dr. Reynolds if he would speak to each one individually, but in succession.
Yeah, great, thank you. Our first field trip is Mr. Bailey and Mr. Hilbert would like to take the AP Environmental Science and AP Biology on an overnight field trip to McCormick's Creek State Park. They'll leave Friday after lunch, so just missed a half day of class and then return on Sunday. Sounds like an exciting opportunity where they'll work on many educational standards, but I'm sure they'll have a little fun as well. So I ask for your approval for the overnight AP Environmental Science and AP Biology field trip to McCormick Creek State Park.
Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the field trip request.
Aaron makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a second. Any comments or discussion? The only thing I would have to say in reading through the itinerary, those kids better dress warm if it's cold. Said there's no heat in the buildings.
Well, if it's anything like it was in February this year when I stayed for 3 days, the temperatures were in the 60s and the low 70s, so who knows?
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Our next field trip is for the Health Occupation Students of America, and Sarah Howley would like to take the student officers to participate in a leadership skills training. It's October 26th and 27th, departure at 8 o'clock and return at 3:30. Again, HOSA is one of those outstanding student groups that's really a feather in our cap at the high school and for our corporation. I would recommend that the board approve Mrs. Howley's HOSA field trip for student officer training overnight to Camp Allendale in Trafalgar, Indiana.
Okay, do I hear a motion we approve the field trip?
So moved.
Okay, Suzanne makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Aaron seconds it. And I just wanted to add too that this helps these kids come back and teach other kids, which I think is a wonderful thing. So, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, the final field trip is Mr. Eckert taking the chamber and symphonic choirs to Chicago to a national choral competition. I think that historically they have gone to these trips in the past. I will say that I had lots of questions for Randy. I have not reviewed one of these for him before, so I had lots of questions and he had all the answers. So I really appreciate his hard work and Mrs. Wolpe's follow-up with him. It sounds like an exciting opportunity, and again, it's one of those feathers in our cap where we have a Class Act, top-notch organization that will have the opportunity to participate in a choral festival at the national level in Chicago. They have tailored the trip for us, so they're only going to miss one day of school, March 16th, and be gone to Chicago 16th, 17th, and return on the 18th. They'll be using, if they do miss school, so they'll be using some student in need funds as well as some fundraisers. And then as a choral department, they're going to take care of a lot of the travel costs. I believe it's half of the travel costs to help defray the costs for some of the students. So I would like to ask the board's approval for Mr. Eckert to take the chamber and symphonic choirs to the national choral competition in Chicago from March 16th to the 18th.
Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the Chamber and Symphonic Choir field trip to Chicago.
Do you hear a
West.
second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And now we move to our work session.
Okay, for our work session this evening, we are going to be looking at academic achievement. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reynolds.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask Mr. Shunnison if he would come up and provide. He has, of course, worked very closely. Dr. Hartley is out of town at a John Hattie conference. He is very excited. He's really kind of geeked out about the nerdiness of John Hattie and doing that conference. And I'm anxious to hear back from what he gathers from that conference.
So if they have no idea who John Hattie is,
just a little bit. John Hattie is an educational researcher. The thrust of his work deals with effect of educational interventions. So how effective is homework on really improving student achievement? How effective is feedback, extended day, group work. I mean, anything and everything that affects the classroom, he's studied and done an effect size on how it affects student achievement and student learning. So,
And it happens to be a big part of Dr. Hartley's dissertation.
That's part two is Dr. Hartley did a study on efficacy and really student achievement and outcomes, and John Hattie was a major site of resource in his dissertation. So a really exciting time, and anxious to get some of that information back. Dr. Hartley did present at the 8-step retreat, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and one of the things his session that he did for the elementary retreat breakouts was over effect size and what Hattie says is a good and smart use of classroom instruction time. So tonight I left just some data on your stations to review, most of which was in the board update. So just so you have it in front of you, easy access. And we'll walk through each of those forms, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop at any time. Really have three main sections of the work session tonight. Just to like to give you a snapshot overview of our school data that we use. And again, it's not all of it. It's just a couple of the major components that we look at. The school grades and ISTEP, and I know there's obviously some consternation with ISTEP and school grades, but I think we would be irresponsible if we didn't, of course, take that into consideration when we look at our student achievement. Well, we're going to be looking at the NWEA assessment and how we utilize that information and how that has grown. And then also just the teacher data, not only the common formative assessments that they give each month and that they utilize to drive instruction, but also just teacher experts. I mean, that's what they are. They're in the field, they're experts. So they're informal observations and both formal as homework, classwork, reports, presentations as a formal assessment as well. But just a few components of that of data that we'll be looking at this evening. Then part two would be our goals, just some long-term broad goals that we have for the corporation. that we're working on and working towards, and then finally, what are we doing? What are we doing to address our needs, and what are we doing to meet those goals that we have set for the corporation? Just briefly to look at school grades. School grades are pretty complicated, and what we're working on right now is, we've had a number of conversations with our principals and thus the principals with the teachers. But school grades aren't as simple as they appear. You look down and you read in the paper or see on the news the A, B, C, D, F rating. But it's not that simple. I mean, there's many components to it. You talk about achievement, but you're also talking about growth. You're also talking about attendance, test participation even, at the elementaries and intermediate buildings. And then at the high school, it's much more complicated. You're talking about college and career readiness, attendance, and in addition to all those testing pieces. As you can see, we're really happy with our school grades. Could there be improvements? Absolutely. Did they catch us by surprise? No. We by the time you get those embargoed test results back for the buildings, you know where you're going to be. And besides that, you also have that NWEA piece. And then the teacher portion. You kind of know where you're going to be before those grades come out. So it didn't catch us by surprise, and already taking steps to address some of those grades that aren't where we want them to be. Part two, I think it's important to understand too that one or two kids can make a difference between a letter grade. Not only is it what we say and what we do, that every kid counts, but literally one or two kids can make a difference between an A or B. I can tell you that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 6 elementaries were 1 or 2 students away from being a grade higher. Wow. Literally, one or two students away from being a grade higher. And the principals and Dr. Hartley could tell you who those kids are because they've looked at that data. I mean, they once that growth information came in. So what do? You begin to, you put your Lincoln logs back together and see what you can't do to build those kids up so that they're better prepared the next time.
So Chuck, so
Absolutely.
you're saying we can identify individuals in classrooms that perform poorly, and then that carries through to the grades?
Yeah. So kind of, and Mr. Shanison, jump in anytime. Really, the major component of the school grade is achievement. It's how they do on that I-STEP test. However, the second half of the component really is growth. So where did the other kids, and they break it down to lower 25 percentile of the kids and upper 75. Now, that's true too, whether they are 100% pass plus school, they still divide them into bottom 25 and upper 75. And then you get growth points for all kids, but you get bonus growth points for those bottom 25 kids. So getting those kids to pass and grow the bottom 25 is almost a double shot to the grade. But yeah, because when you get down and you have 2 to 4 classrooms, you can really see who grew, who didn't, and you can tell. The state doesn't tell you, well, if this kid would have passed, you would have been an A. But you can take a look at the data and say, man, one kid away. Well, there's poor little Chuck. Poor little Chuck was 2 points from passing. If he would have passed, that would have been a point here.
So I guess for those, do we feel I-STEP was a reasonable account of where they are, or did they just not test well that day? I mean, does that make sense?
Well, I guess that's the big debate. I would say there's some fatal flaws to the test, or they wouldn't be replacing it. I will say, though, that our maps are aligned to those tests, which are aligned to state standards, so we believe that we're addressing all those things, but I also believe there's some fatal flaws to that test, whether it's really addressing the need or meeting the kids where they are, which the new test, I talked about a little bit in a couple board updates ago, where that test is going to be adaptive, kind of like the NWEA assessment that we give, that it will move with the student, get progressively harder, or it will not move on if the student struggles some, just so they don't, just fold up. They have a couple questions in a row that they struggle with. Kids tend to give up or can give up, and that adaptive test is supposed to help address those concerns.
I can say one thing, John. I mean, I haven't looked at the individual kids. I leave that up to the building and the classroom to look at those individual kids. But there's always kids who you're like, man, they knocked it out of the park that day or that week or whatever. And then there's those kids who are like, wow, I wonder what was going on with them. They didn't score nearly what we thought they were going to score. So again, that's the tough thing about when your school grade is based on a certain set of data. Just no matter what it is what it is that we all have our bad days and we all have our fantastic days. So I think it's a culmination of, when you look at all the different data pieces, is, are we heading in the right direction? So like right now, what we do is we take that lower 25% growth, we identify who those kids are who didn't grow, who were our bottom growers, is basically what it comes down to. They might have tested really, really well as far as like their score, but they didn't grow very well. So we really look at those because unfortunately the way to play the game is that if you can get your bottom growers to grow high or have high growth, you get those bonus points that Dr. Reynolds was talking about. So ultimately you want all your kids to grow. That's why when he goes to like the next slide, we'll look at, ultimately our goal is for 90% of our kids to meet or exceed their growth in NWEA. Because we know if we've got 90% of our kids meeting or exceeding that growth from the beginning of the school year to the end, or from winter to winter, over the course of a calendar year, then we're feeling good about the direction that kids are heading in. So
one last question. So once at the classroom level, these children will be identified, and they need to. Teachers will do what needs.
Yeah.
Do we track like year to year? So if I was a low grower, last year I'm still a low grower. Are we do we have a multi-year track for some of these students?
Yeah, I think when you change assessment, you kind of have to, it takes a while to adapt to see, you think you're doing the best you can with what you have, what information you have at the tip of your fingers, but it evolves. Last year, we really started to look at those bottom 25% kids and how can we best meet those needs. So this year, now that we have the second round of data, we're looking at that. So to your point, yes, we don't have 3 years of it, but now we're going to have 2 years of it. So we're going to continue, and then once we get it figured out, they're going to change the test on us. But yeah,
but as soon as you show it, like you're where you're supposed to be, they up it.
Yeah.
But the one thing that we do have 3-year data on, and we should have 30-year data on coming up, is NWEA, and I'll show you some reports that we look at that you can really see a trend of a particular student in reading, language, and math as well. And then it correlates. NWEA has done a correlation study not only with ISTEP but also with ECT, and how that correlates too.
And you're obviously in the GT group, because a lot of things we're talking about right now are those things that little head in the presentation about what we're doing to address those gaps. But yeah, right on. Great questions. ISTEP, again, we've already had some conversations about ISTEP, and I know we shared that information with you guys a long time ago. But, I mean, that goes hand in hand with that, so I won't talk too much about that. But growth is really a key to those school grades. If you would just quickly take a look at that first stapled packet with the bar graph on the bottom. Just quickly, your blue columns are your top 75 growth group. Your burgundy column is your bottom, and then your average growth overall is in the green column. Just quick, 30,000 view. You look at that chart. The three schools on the right were all schools that improved their grade, at least the letter grade. The three schools on the left maintained or had a drop. Actually, they had a drop in their letter grade.
So, can you look at the test in total and know where our weak areas are in math and English?
Yeah. So we have that data point, and the tough part about the ISTEP data point is that you have one snapshot at the end of the year. And let's face it, when everybody, and that comes back usually in the spring or in the fall, you're either exhausted and ready to take a break, or you're so busy trying to prep that I don't think that we utilize that as well as we could because of time limits. But yes, it separates it in strands, and something we'll maybe talk a little bit more about in a couple slides is about what we're doing to address those gaps. I think the best piece that we have is that NWEA piece. Again, it's adaptive to the kid. So we do have that ISTEP data that says, hey, as a corporation, as a building, as a classroom, as a student, here are the gaps, or if that's what we're looking for, here are the gaps. But it's, again, that one dipstick. With the NWEA assessment, we have a few more frequent assessments. The nice part about NWEA, it's adaptive, so it kind of takes maybe some of that test anxiety piece out. It's adaptive to the kid, so it meets them where they are. And it also has a skills mapper component that will allow the teacher to have some additional resources at their fingers to assign kids, or to pull some of those map skills out, give it to the coach, give it to the interventionist to work with the kids. As a district, we look at the 30,000 view, and then we ask the buildings. Then again, you take a little closer look, and then on down right to each kid. When you go from the building principal down to the interventionist, where they're looking very closely at each kid to see where they can meet their need. But yeah.
Well, and I also, I sent you a note on it because it's concerned me for years, because we can't seem to pinpoint what the problem is at the middle school level. It seems like they're doing fine in elementary, then they get to middle school and you see this big drop. I don't know if it's the test, I don't know if it's the way we're teaching, I don't know if it's skills not being taught. I keep asking this question every single year.
Yeah,
because I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I think, Dixie, that we are pinpointing the problem at this point in time, and I think we're really getting into what one of the issues is. And I've had conversations, especially with our ELA teachers over the last few years, and quite honestly, one of the big frustration is kids just being readers. Mm-hmm. And what we've really talked about is about 8 years ago, we went to a basal, and we taught out of the basal, and we got rid of, and it's not only in this corporation, but a lot of corporations, we bought into the big basal and kind of killed, in my opinion, a kid's wanting to read. and I hate to steal Dr. Hartley's thunder, but he'll echo this. And quite honestly, the high school is. We had conversations about this 2 years ago. In the high school, kids get to the high school and they're like, "You mean you want us to read 8 to 12 novels?" I mean, we read 1, we read 2, and the middle schools are like, that's about all they think that they can handle, because coming out of the elementary, they just haven't done a lot of reading. So we've had a lot of conversations really over the last couple of years, and just as recently as tonight, working with a teacher out of Plymouth who has been utilizing, I don't know if you guys have heard of the Book Whisperer. It's a book by Donald Miller, and really it's a 40 novel challenge for middle school kids, really for any kid. And so looking at utilizing more student choice with reading and developing your instructional practices. If I want to talk to a kid about context clues, and every single one of you read a different book, and the question is, okay, what is going on in the story? What do you think is going to happen next? And why do you think that? Can you look for some context clues? It doesn't really matter what book all of us are reading. We should be able to look in our novel and be able to justify that. And so one of the great points that this teacher touched on tonight was it's an easy way to differentiate learning, because if you're reading at your level, I'm reading at my level, and I'm trying to assign or push you into books that are at that level, then we've actually got kids reading. And so, we're going to be working with teachers this year. We've had some teachers show some interest in trying this philosophy and this approach, as opposed to every single kid reads The Outsiders, and 2 or 3 of the kids love The Outsiders, and the rest of the kids, aren't really concerned with what's going on with Pony Boy. And so, we're not that The Outsiders isn't a great book, don't get me wrong, but we're seeing that love of reading is gone out of kids, and so we're really trying to recapture that. And it's hard to be better writers if you're not better readers, and so they kind of go hand in hand. But in order to increase our writing, we've got to build kids' stamina to wanting to read. So I've been in conversations with Joy Kerr. She's a 7th, 8th grade English teacher over in Illinois. She's wrote a book called Shift This. We've had a lot of conversations with her about some of her practices. And I'm really excited about the coaches we have in place, and some of the teachers who are willing to shift this and get out of their comfort zone and try some different things, because we know that we get them in 5th grade and then something happens. And middle school is a tough enough age to begin with. And then, what can we do differently? Because what we're doing, quite honestly, just isn't working. I mean, let's call it how it is. And so I think we've got some ideas in the works, and I'm excited to see where it takes us here this year. So
Don't steal all Slide 3 thunder, Mr.
Too late.
Shaughnessy. It's too late. You're
Thunder's
let the cat
gone,
out of the
Dr.
bag.
Reynolds. It's gone.
Man.
It's all right. It's a work session. We're just having a
Just
conversation.
having conversations.
Well, I'm all for having them read books of choice. I mean, and books on their level so they can move up.
But it's a difference between just sustained silent reading, where
Right.
kids just go and read.
No,
But the approach that some of these different teachers are using and
Guiding.
having success with it is then you actually use those individual novels to teach from,
Guided
which is a
reading.
completely different practice than what we are traditionally used to. So it'll be very interesting to see our growth with that, and as a couple of these teachers are willing to
Shift this.
Yeah, to take, just be innovative, just take a risk. I mean, that's what we're about.
We
so.
need more than a few.
Well, we got to start somewhere. That's
Yeah.
for sure. So.
Yeah, okay.
Another major data point that we utilize is NWEA, and I think that RCS used it a number of years ago, but we've gone back to it in order to streamline assessment, have that national norm reference test that I referenced earlier. that we would give it 3 times of the year, and we still have that one test that we have for summer school that we also do. The nice part about that norm reference test is that it allows us to measure our student achievement based on the national norm for those types of kids, or for those age of kids. So it says a 7th grader is going to score a 223 is the national norm in math. Where are we compared to that? Not only is that's a good information, but it also has good resources that go along with that. If I could just walk briefly through that second stapled chart that I gave you. I put it 3 different ways, just depending on how your brain works. So that first chart you see there is, we're comparing apples to oranges. So the fall 15, fall 16, fall 17. What you can do is you can just look at your first grade to first grade to first grade. That would be apples to oranges to see where your kids are starting each year. Boy, our kids in 2015, they were geniuses compared to all of the other kids. Well, that's not quite true. If you recall, we had just implemented NWEA, and we gave it about 3 weeks too late. So there was an extra 3 weeks of instruction, so those grades are a little inflated compared to the other two. But there are scores, so they're on the sheet. So you can also track the kid by color code. So as an example, your grade kindergartners, grade K, then their first grade, their score, second grade score are all in gray. So you can follow kids that way through their fall progression. The national norm is listed there, so you can take a look at that. And we have another color-coded sheet behind it that I'll talk about in just a second. But it will kind of give you a quick snapshot on how we're looking at some of that data as well. I think it's important to note that the national norm is a median score. So it's the score right down the middle of the road is how I think about it. So it's the median score. So what it does, it gives you that middle score and really neutralizes your outliers. Our score that we have here is the mean. It takes those outliers in consideration because they're all of our kids. So we think that's important to do. So when you see that, there is a bit of a difference there that we're given the mean. If you flip over the page, you can see that the green is at or above, the yellow is within 2 points of that national norm, and the red is 3 or more points. There's really nothing scientific about that because I think the standard deviation, Mike, is plus or minus 3 points. But for us, that's how we send up our red flags. Or I guess, or our celebratory flags, one of the two. But just, again, you can see that first column is green, almost entirely green because we took the test about 3 weeks late. So just about everybody was at or above the national norm. You see the next 2 falls; those are probably a little truer snapshot of our student population. As you can see, winter we typically have a little bit of a drop. We don't typically meet the national norm in the winter, but then again, you see the spring scores, and we tend to do a little better job. I think, Mr. Robinson, to your point, what do you see there? 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Mm-hmm.
Math is red and yellow. Now our reading's a little better at the bottom. I mean, we're starting to hit the green, but we have more red and yellows than we do for K to 4. So to your point, that's on our radar, and we do look at that. At the district level, again, we're at that big overview, and Mike's going to show you how we step through some of those data conversations with principals, and then thus with teachers.
Now you're still using, on the second page, you're using the same scores, and you're still using mean versus median.
Yeah.
Now, does the national norm give you a median value as well?
The national norm only gives you median. It does not give you a mean. The norm doesn't give you a mean score.
So is that a fair comparison?
It is. I believe it is. Mike, what did it give us additional information about comparing the mean to the median?
No. Not that I
Now,
recall,
do-
Jeff.
Do we have the ability also to do norm versus?
To
or
do median
to do
median scores?
Median versus?
I think we do, but the mean is a truer picture of where we are as a district. I think, as opposed to just to give us that score that's right in the middle, we factor all those kids, all the kids in,
Well, and I understand that, but I guess in fairness to comparison, is the only reason why I asked.
Yeah, just the true median to median.
Yeah.
We have not pulled that. I'm not sure you can. Do you know, Mr. Shenison?
Oh, I'm sure we can.
I'm sure somewhere in there
sure
we
we can
can.
find it, yeah.
What percentage of, nationally uses NWEA? You think 50% of the country? Or?
I don't know. I would say, I couldn't even give a ballpark on percentages. It is the most recognized.
Is it regional at all, or is it span the entire?
It's national. Actually, I would assume probably international at this point. You
There
could
seems to
probably.
be quite a few people in Indiana. I guess.
Yeah, when they offered up that assessment grant, a lot of districts went to it. Some districts have used it a long time, like I said, the RCS used to, but it's just one of those expenses. But I think it's critical, and I will tell you, it's not been normed to the I-STEP yet, because the I-STEP is so new, and NWEA would like to collect more data before they give a true norm of the I-STEP. But I'm telling you, they do give you an I-STEP predictor, and it was pretty spot on to where we would be.
And they don't want to invest a lot of resources into doing that simply because the test is changing yet again. Second time in the last 5 years. So.
I think
The
spring of
NWEA
19 will
is
have to
just
do it.
so much better to use in the classroom, for your real instruction. So, and that's my opinion.
And it's been a learning process. You have to get in there. You have to get comfortable with the scores. You have to get comfortable with using the data. Those can be difficult conversations, and we'll talk a little bit more about the data conversations in just a second.
But you get it back where you can use it. That's the
Yes.
reason I liked it
I
as
think
a
that-
teacher. You wait on I-STEP, and then you normally, by the time you get it back, you don't have those kids.
The additional time you spend looking at the data, I think, surpasses your time for efficiency and really gearing your classroom instruction to meet the kids where they are. If your brain works this way, on that back page, it groups the kids in the years, so that you'll see the 15-16 school year, 16-17 school year, and then we'll continue with that 17-18 school year. Just in case your brain works that way, sometimes it's easy to see the color. Then you can see actually the colors. They'll step down for an entire year to take a look at their growth. And really, that final piece of assessment data we're looking at is that we use those common formative assessments, and I know we've talked a lot about those. They are assessments built by our teachers that are built on the maps that we revised with the teachers over the last couple of years and continue to do so. And then they identify the power standards, if you would, for that month, and the most important standards, and give a short assessment, usually 4 questions is kind of the rule of thumb to have a true snapshot on whether a student understands a standard for that CFA assessment, and then you use that CFA assessment at the learning log meetings.
CFA
common formative assessment.
Thank you.
So those CFAs are grade and building specific, but they're common at that level. Through conversations with the teachers, They just would like some additional flexibility. They have some good assessments in place already that are it's doing the same thing in an effort to not over-assess kids or over-test kids. You know, we talked about having the flexibility of using your own assessment in lieu of the CFA as long as it was common within the building. At the elementary level, they've had conversations where they're all using the same ones across the district. At the two intermediates, there is some difference. There are some differences between the two buildings at the different grade levels. So they'll take those data, the CFA information in math and English to their learning log meetings, which we'll talk about a little bit more in just a second. But also that informal and formal piece that I mentioned earlier. You know, sometimes good old-fashioned expert teaching, being the educational expert in that room, says, hey, you know, Chuck, the test doesn't show up, but I am certain, you know, that he knows how to, he has a firm grip on number sense, and I have some other data that shows that he does. He must have had a bad day here, you know, so we always want to triangulate those learning log meetings with NWEA, CFAs, and then the teacher input to really get a true snapshot of where that kid is for those learning log meetings. This by no means is the all-inclusive list of our data points that we use. You know, at the high school, we're looking at certifications for college and career readiness. We're looking at AP scores. We're looking at SAT, PSAT scores. But these are where we're living most frequently. When we're talking about just daily classroom instruction. Okay. Just a couple of broad goals. I think it's important before we talk about our interventions to address the data. Kind of just some broad goals that we have and we've discussed. Our school grades, we want all buildings to be A's and B's. And and we're close, but we're not there yet. So that is one of our goals, is to get to that point. We all know how it is to maintain straight A's all the time. We want to be realistic, but also the expectation is we're going to be all A's and B's. Of course, the I-STEP is the major contributor to our school grade, and it's going to transition next spring to the I-Learn. You know, unfortunately, typically when there's a change in assessment, you'll see another dip in school grades and school accountabilities. It's just really been the trend. Unlike with this I-STEP, it usually has a pretty swift uptake after that. I think there was some gains this year, but really is kind of, most corporations were like us, kind of a mixed bag, especially corporations like us. I mean, we had some grow, some that didn't grow. As Mike mentioned earlier, our goal with NWEA is that 90% of our students meet the growth targets. That would be a long-term goal. NWEA would recognize us probably as an exemplary district across the country. You're talking 90% of students meet their growth targets. That's probably top 5% of all schools in the country would be doing that. But I think that's a realistic goal. But it will be a journey to get there. But I think that's what we strive for. I think it's important to note too that we really put an emphasis on growth. Not that it's the end all, but you know that really allows each student to for us to meet the needs of the individual students. Achievement. Sometimes, I know Mr. Terrell said it before, but achievement sometimes happens in spite of what happens in the classroom. If you have growth, that's because of what's happening in the classroom. So we really want to emphasize that. Continue to look at that teacher, CFA, and classroom data, and using data to drive classroom instruction. Have that embedded in just the daily practice with our teachers, and that's through Our continued modeling from the central office level to the building principals, and then with the building principals down with the teachers in the classrooms. That should just be a part of everyday language and embedded in the conversation that you have with your colleagues. So those are just kind of the big overall goals of central office as far as student achievement. Addressing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Before you move away from school grades, and this is just my
absolutely.
spill once more, talk to the state, or whoever you have to talk to, about explaining a school grade without taking a 2-day workshop to do it. Because it is so difficult if you've ever had to dig deep about why your school grade is what it is. You can't explain it. If a kid says, oh, my school got a C, they can't explain it. I don't understand why they make something so difficult.
As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Hartley is working with Sam Thomas on putting together a video. He does a really nice job of explaining it, and it's kind of like the enculturation process that goes on with so many things that we do. It's important for everybody to understand that. To your point, what we're going to try to do is we're going to put together a video and we'll get it out to everybody just so we can explain it, because it's complicated. I mean, it's just not, hey, how many kids passed? You're under this mark, you're a C. You're above this mark, you're an A. I mean, it's complicated. So what we want to do is put that video together and get it out to everybody. Mr. Thomas is going to go out to each building and present at a PLC or during the PD day, excuse me.
Yeah, because so many times the school has done really, really well,
Yep.
and it's just a couple of little minor things.
Yep.
And
Or they have great achievement, but the kids didn't grow.
Right.
Well, you get dinged for that. You saw in that first sheet, you saw, Westview was one of our higher achieving buildings, but you saw their growth was low, so they really got dinged on that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and
That's-
Charles.
Charles the same way. It's a high achieving building, but didn't have a whole lot of growth. So they didn't lose points, but they didn't get it either. I mean, they didn't ding him for it, but they didn't give him the points that Star, as an example, got for all the growth they had. So.
And the real challenge with that as well, with our, and when I say our, the state's application for ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act at the federal level, the way that we calculate these grades is yet to change again. Which hasn't been determined yet based off of what's coming.
We want you to hit this target, but we're just going to, it's going to be one of those targets we keep moving. Not even moving. We're not even going to tell you where it is.
But the thing that we need to keep in mind with that is, while that is frustrating, that's why it's so important and why we made the move to NWA a couple of years ago, because that gives us a consistent way to show growth of our students, to show where they are compared to national norms. And as we continue to make all these changes in the state, we still, as a state, continue to score in the top 15% in the nation. So you just need to keep all that in mind, because it's easy to get bogged down. And I had this conversation with Mrs. Rhodes at Westview. Their teachers took that really personally. She took it really hard.
Oh, man.
And it's one data point. We still need to keep in mind, the bottom line is our job, based off of our vision and goals, is to provide quality education for our students so that they continue to grow. And we can prove that that is happening. And we just need to keep moving forward with that.
Well,
and I'll step off of my soapbox.
Well, because NWA is stable. That's what I like about it.
Yes.
It's stable.
All right. So I think it's important to have some conversations about what we're doing and how we're addressing our needs to meet our goals. I think the 8-step process has been critical. I think the misconception was it was for failing schools, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just good practice for for improving instruction, regardless, from improving where you are, whether it's pass plus or bottom 25% on the I-STEP achieving. And they're just, it's just good practice. Some of the things that we've done this year with the 8-step process, Mr. Shunnison wrote into the Title II grant that we would have some retreat funds available to pay teacher stipends, to come in one as a team to do some planning on the 8-step plans that they wrote last year, to really get some action behind those, and then have the opportunity to pay full buildings to come in for full building retreats. The elementaries, they decided, they got together and decided they were going to do one Saturday and have all teachers, all buildings from the elementary level meet at the high school and do a full retreat. All the coaches were, all the e-learning coaches were there. Sam and Cynthia were there. Dr. Hartley presented. It was just a really terrific opportunity to really dig into their 8-step action plans, which are written in the building for their buildings, based, Dixie, based on your question about their individual needs. Get down to the nitty-gritty to see how can we pick these kids up that are struggling, or how can we continue to push these high-achieving kids. It was just really exciting, and I don't know if we could ever afford to do that again with federal funding always being in question, but we had the opportunity to offer that this year, and it was terrific. Some folks at the high school, I think they did it in 2 shifts. They did 2 3-hour shifts for the entire building retreat. They did some team building, and then how that translated into the action plan was really pretty neat. But again, it was an exciting new journey to that 8-step process, because that was September 15 is when we rolled out the training to those 8-step teams, and we've had some turnover in staff, so it's always good to have a refresher retreat to get folks back on board. Some of the most powerful things we do are the learning log meetings, and Mike can give you kind of an example, or we'll give you an example in just a minute on what that looked like with NWEA and some of the conversations we have. And that those meetings are journeys, and we really have come a long way, where you're sitting down and you're talking about data, and you're talking about how you can help get kids and really let your defenses down on how to have those good professional conversations about best instructional practices. Those meetings are really twofold. They're to look at data, but they're also to share instructional strategies. I think that's some of the most powerful conversations in the building that occur during those learning log meetings. Another part of that 8-step process is the instructional focus, and that just again gives a whole building direction on maybe that 5,000-foot view of the needs of your building. It's not a district instructional focus. It's not. It's not a big district instructional focus. It's based on your building, needs, and that looks different in certain buildings. At the high school, they do one big instructional focus based on their data that they get out of those learning log meetings. So maybe it's providing supporting details in your writing. So everybody does that in the entire building for the month of January. At some of the elementaries, it's based at the grade level. Instructional focus for English and math is in each grade level, but again, that's one of those steps that we use to address those needs. Based on those 2 conversations, we then have success time, that additional time that is at the elementary and at the intermediate building, built in for English and math standards-based instruction on where the students have gaps, or if they are pass plus, how can we continue to push those kids that have already shown proficiency in those 2 standards? So how can we continue to push those kids? But it's additional standards-based instruction time in math and English. And I think that's been critical to the growth that we have seen.
Well, and actually, the pass plus is harder.
Yep. Absolutely. Because and so often. that Pass Plus kids get left out. Well, they're fine, they don't need my help. Well, just no.
But they don't grow.
Correct. And then you get dinged in your upper 75% kids not growing. So again, that is all part of that monitoring growth and achievement that we talked about a little bit ago. Now, so the third component I think is professional development, and you've read in the board updates and have been our bell ringers in the board meetings, but it's critical that you offer those professional development opportunities to your administrators and to your teachers. Just like a classroom where we're asking them to personalize their learning, we want to personalize learning for our professionals too. And I think Mike hinted at that earlier. Some of the work that we've done with John Hattie, Dr. Hartley has done with John Hattie, Matt Miller with Ditch
That conference?
Ditch That Conference or Ditch That Homework. Joy Kerr, Alice Keeler, just talking about instructional practices and how to meet the needs of folks. I'm telling you, it is just as important for your administrative team as it is for your students that are in need. Just a few things, if I could, just to tout a little bit. Not only do we offer the Summer Mission Possible Conference and our our Summer of E-Learning, we sent folks to a blended learning conference on, again, how to better utilize technology to improve instruction. Identifying that reading is critical for learning. We had teams of elementary folks that we sent in the summertime to Orton Gillingham training, which is it's an intense training. It's not where you just go sit and enjoy. I mean, it is hands-on. It is you're active, you're up, you're utilizing that training. And those folks that have gone to that have had a lot of success in their classroom based on their classroom data. So much so, we're looking at maybe bringing Orton Gillingham here to offer that in-service here at our district, A, to cut down on travel costs, but B, to offer it to more folks. We really want to pull in some of the intermediates, again, to address that need we have at our intermediate buildings as well. But that Orton Gillingham is going to be pretty exciting. Cynthia and Sam have provided some reading and writing across the science curriculum with the new science kits being rolled out this year. They've done a lot of reading and writing and how to incorporate reading and writing with those kits and that curriculum that they adopted with that. But just a couple of things. And Mr. Shaughnessy, feel free to add anything else there.
The biggest thing that I'm really impressed with in the secondary buildings is utilizing the teachers within the building to support their colleagues. And if you want to see some great PD, take off early on a Tuesday and go over to the high school and the two intermediates, and you can see some very engaged, active professional development that's taking place by the teachers, led by teachers. So just met with the principals this afternoon, and they're so excited about the willingness of their teacher leaders to go to a conference knowing full well that they want to present and share what they've learned, with their colleagues. And whether it's the next gen cadre, whether it's Ditch That Conference. We've sent a lot of teachers to conferences. Really, a lot of it is just about building confidence. We're in a profession where it's been past practice to not tout yourself because you don't want to be seen as the know-it-all in a certain area. And breaking down those barriers and embracing the fact that we appreciate our knowledge base from within, I think has really started to show itself, especially this year. And so whether it's the whole cadre approach, with the next gen cadre, and whether it's the fantastic opportunities that Heidi Hisrich has shown, with what she's been able to do with Project Lead the Way, and just being able to embrace the fantastic teachers we have in the corporation, I think has been huge, especially this year from what I've seen. So that's been the biggest thing when it comes to professional development. And quite honestly, I talked to a lot of people across the state, and one person from the DOE said, "Is it a requirement for a Richmond teacher to have a Twitter account?" Because we're all over the place. And no, it's not. But I would say that we have a fair amount of teachers who are utilizing Twitter to personalize their PD. I mean, you can get so many great resources and so many great connections without even ever tweeting. I mean, you can. So we've got several teachers who haven't even sent out anything, but they use that mechanism to connect with individuals across the state, across the country, and even across the globe, and really build those connections to personalize their PD. So that's been, I think, pretty profound statement from someone at the Department of Ed that has noticed the number of our teachers who are utilizing that social media aspect to grow themselves.
And from the ones I've seen, it really showcases their work, which sends a message out to everybody about the good things that are actually happening here.
Free.
Yeah.
Free advertisement for their classroom and
Absolutely.
for their school.
Absolutely.
And when your school is a C or a D or an E, did you say E?
I did
Dr.
say
Ren?
E earlier. I'm so
But you can visually see a lot of the great things that are going on in classrooms. Follow the hashtag of Better Fairview. I mean, the things that Adam and his staff are willing to share and not be shy about it and not be like, look at me about it, but they're just letting you know that they're doing some fantastic things, and they're building, and they're instructionally sound. I mean, it's good stuff. And you don't know that unless you're on Facebook. You don't know that unless you're on Instagram. You don't know that unless you're on Twitter. And it's fun to see them willing to share.
So we've been talking to you, sharing with you, answering questions for about 40 minutes now. We really want this to be, what else do you need to know? What else can we share with you regarding student achievement that maybe you haven't already seen? So before we bring this thing to a close, what other questions might we answer for you regarding student achievement? You've had time, you received the information in the board update. You've heard the information tonight. This isn't the first time. You're constantly informed of different things or given the opportunity to look at different things regarding student achievement. What else can we answer for you?
I'd just like to see the changes along the way that's meeting the deficiencies. As you go through the year, what are we changing? What are we trying to do to meet those?
Okay.
I just want to reiterate again what.
Pardon me?
So what are we doing with the information?
Right.
I just want to reiterate again what Dr. Reynolds is saying with how much of a misconception the school grade is, because we have schools that are performing extremely high, but since they don't show the growth because the kids are so high that they can't measure that as well, they not really get dinged for it, but don't get the extra credit for it.
Absolutely.
So to your point, several, would you say 4 of the elementaries were within 5 students?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, 5 of them were within 1 or 2 kids.
Right. So, you're looking at a huge overall increase in your score. So, it really is kind of a misconception among the public that the grading system on those is like traditional, what we're used to being in a classroom, and it's totally not. very, very.
And Brad, to your
possibly-
point, when you look at Charles, for instance, who 5 out of the last 6 years has been an A, and they dropped to a C.
It looks
Same
terrible. It
kids,
looks terrible in the
same-
public's eye,
but-
but their scores haven't gone down. It's just the growth rate's not there.
But how we factor grades has changed as well.
Right.
And that's my point about not being able to explain it well, because this also is an economic thing for our city. I mean,
Oh,
people
absolutely.
look at this when they're deciding to locate here.
And I tell you, Charles was I wrote it down exactly. They were a 79.6 was their
Being a B.
percentages. So they're 0.4 of a percent. So
Mr. Walton, in your class, you'd probably round that up to a 80. wouldn't you?
round that up to an A. They get an A. They get a B for me.
You know, unfortunately, it has an effect, sometimes a negative effect, on the people who are doing the hardest work, the teachers in there, when they know that every day, you know, because I've had conversations with some principals and some teachers in those schools that are up here, and those schools who have, you know, the grade score comes out to be less than what they had wanted. And again, it boils down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 students on that particular day. And it's hard not to take that personally if you are a teacher in that building, when you know that you've done everything that is necessary and can be done. And the grade does not, and I'll just rehash that again as everybody else has, the grade does not reflect the positive work that they have done. And I guess one of the biggest challenges is as you go to define what else needs to be done to improve that, is how to keep those teachers encouraged and know that they're supported for the efforts that they're given. And that's a challenge.
To your point, and to what you were talking about earlier about Westview, took it extremely personal.
Yes. Absolutely.
And just a message to our staff and teachers, I mean, we get it.
Yes,
So,
we
That's
do.
important.
We
We
get it.
understand.
So,
That's
Yes.
important. And I tell them that, but it is important to hear you say that as well.
no, I mean,
They need
it's
to
one
hear
of those
from
deals
us.
that the system is what it is. And I mean, you can't say it enough that we understand the frustration that they're going through, because again, it's the public perception that's being dinged because of it.
Right.
And it's not that they're not doing their job or doing it less effectively. It's, you know, it's a flawed system.
Well, and before we leave this too, because I was watching some of the opiate addiction on television that's going on in schools with parents. One school had 12 parents die in 1 year from overdose.
Not in
and-
Richmond, Indiana, though.
No, no.
Yes, yeah.
This was somewhere else, but nonetheless, we have our
That's
own
fair.
issues here. But I think we do need to look at some way to address the emotional needs of our kids as they come into the school to learn or to test.
Well, and you look at the change in demographics at Charles
Yes.
over the last, I mean, you don't use it as, where I'm not using it as an excuse, but it is a factor.
And it's in all our schools.
Well, but I think we are trying to address that. We've had in Dr. DeSaltes from Butler University, and she's done a lot with our teachers of looking at the brain and how it works, and we've had professionals in to look at traumatic brain injury, and we have
It's Dr. Desatel.
Desatel.
E.
Yeah, easy.
And like it's part of our
easy,
8-step
E. So,
AUL. Dr. D.
Dr. D.
Go Dogs.
Yep.
But as part of our 8-step training, you know, we went back through our nonviolent crisis intervention, just the verbal de-escalation, and how if a kid is an adult at home and they come to school and then you tell them to do something,
Right.
sometimes it's hard for a child to turn that off when they were the one at home that was making breakfast for their
That's
2 or
right.
3 younger siblings. So we've done a lot this year even with that, and how do you you know, those precipitating factors and what you say and how you present yourself as an adult can sometimes make the situation worse. And so, because ultimately we want kids to be engaged in class. And so if we're not aware that of those factors, and so I think we have done a good job. We didn't put that up there with, academics, but that plays a huge part in it. Dixie, you're absolutely correct. And so I think the teachers have been very appreciative of that as part of their professional development, because you kind of forget sometimes.
Well, and we fought
Well-
and fought to keep the wraparound services that we have. I mean, we fought and fought for that, so I think that's been a huge part of it too.
And kudos to this board for years and years and years being proactive as opposed to reactive with our resources, so we can continue to do this, which is exactly why we're going through this whole master planning process right now, to look at how can we continue to use our resources, knowing that with the
needs.
opioid addictions we're facing as a community, the need is not going to get less. But we need to, and we can do what we need to do as long as we continue to be proactive as opposed to reactive.
Well, I know, I was just watching this one segment today where the school, they were using music and exercise at the beginning of the day to help de-escalate what some of the kids had come from that night, what had happened the night before or the weekend before, things like that. I mean, we need to look at a lot of.
Well, one of the biggest challenges facing schools every day, and not just here, because the place I was supposed to take my trip to in New England, a community that has a third of the population that we have in Richmond, with an average household income of over $200,000, is having this same discussion at the board level there, because they're facing that same challenge. And it is not respective of culture, it's not respective of race or anything else. But I mean, if we're having this discussion there, they're having it there, and they're having it on the West Coast as well. And one of the biggest challenges every day is to have to re-teach learning capabilities every morning when kids come to school, because it's what infiltrates their mind and their lives between 4 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 7:30 the next morning. It's that war zone that a lot of kids have got to go to, that completely eliminates all the good work and the efforts that they have made, or the things that they have learned during that school day the previous day. And it's got to start all over. They have to start all over and all over again every day.
Well, and like I said, I've mentioned it here before, that the hospital has said that in the next, I guess it's 4 years now, that we'll have 2 classrooms of children that were born addicted.
Chuck, I'd like to see PSAT and advanced placement data. If you could grasp the pieces.
Good point.
The PSAT and the advanced placement
Okay.
pieces.
Well, I was wondering if we should, I was going to bring up behavior and how it affects, you hear about how we're having troubles dealing with the behavior in some of the classrooms, and and whether we want to admit it or not, some students really are difficult to get them to want to learn. And the board has said this before, the lower 25%, lower 10%, whatever percentage you want to use, are going to be the most difficult to educate. So should we start diving into more detailed analysis of that and how the behavior is affecting the educational environment? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that'd be an interesting conversation to have with you.
And we do collect that data. They share it at the district level, but they collect at the building level. But yeah.
Because I think it could open some of our eyes if we let's say we just look at the lower 10%. It would be interesting to see what correlation that has to the unsuspended behavior problems, those types of things. Because then we're outside of the realm of just a teacher educating.
Is it fair to say too that part of our discussions going forward in the master planning will probably address alternative education. I mean, I'm assuming that will be in the pool.
Yes. Yep.
Good. Anything else? I want to thank Mr. Johnson, Dr. Reynolds, for your work on this. It was really easy for them as we started to work through this, because it's what they do every day. So they were like, yeah, we've got this, and they just started pulling it all. So it's not special things they had to pull together, but I do appreciate the work.
You don't want to overwhelm, but you know, the PSAT and AP, I mean, where do you stop? I mean, because we have lots of it. We live in it every day. So thank you.
I do want to say one more thing, Mr. Chair, if I can, because I am very concerned about 5 through 8, and I think that I'm asking an awful lot of Stacy and Nicole and their team when it comes to meeting the needs of supporting a 5th grade teacher versus an 8th grade teacher, and just the dynamic between that age gap between 5 and 8. So, you know, I don't know for a fact, but I think that there is something to be said about the fact that you have a building or 2 buildings that span that age gap, and I think that they are trying to do, and I think they're doing a really good job, especially this year, at trying to meet the needs of the differences between what a 5th grade teacher is working with of a kid just transitioning from the elementary, and then what an 8th grade child is looking at, you know, and planning for their high school and their career and college readiness moving on. And so that 4-year age gap or age span may or may not have something to do with, you know, why we see, in my opinion, such a significant dip in achievement at that grade level. And is that really suiting our students the best here in Richmond?
Well, that's just an area that really worries me.
Yeah, well, you know, I start off every meeting, all right, guys, let's talk about Shonison's job security here, because we're not covered. And it's a tough enough age to begin with, and then when you you talk about behavior and you talk about that, is are we open to trying some things differently instructionally? Because, you know, I can see in classrooms where kids perform fantastic and then they walk across the hallway and they're not so fantastic. And then you look at some of the instructional practices and so it's not a simple answer, I don't think.
Yeah, engagement
And that's what
engagement is
I have
really.
a question for you on that, and I've kind of touched around the subject a couple times. Is there any correlation, like, I know we lose students every year, all right, and there's going to be a certain number of 2nd graders we lose, 3rd graders. Is there a larger number of 4th graders that we lose? Is there any correlation there?
No, not really. And really, for the most part, once we get them in the intermediates, they tend to stay.
Right.
Our biggest drop, I believe, is,
I mean, I hear a ton of parents complain about the 5 and 8 in one building, and I was just seeing if there was any kind of correlation there.
Usually not, no.
And kudos to our intermediate buildings of the way they actually structure the building by having 5th grade either upstairs at Test or back in that back hallway at Dennis, and really trying to structure it more like an elementary classroom, only having 2 teachers. I mean, I think that they try to battle that just within the building itself. They still walk kids to specials, they walk them back from the cafeteria, those type of things. I think I think parents appreciate that, and I know that Stacy and Nicole are really working hard this year to build that connection from their building to the elementary that feeds into them, going and doing visits and having like buddy classrooms or setting those type of things up this year, which I've been very, very impressed with some of their ideas that they're looking and starting to do. I'm more concerned is like once they're there and like trying to provide professional development for a 5th grade teacher versus trying to provide professional development for an 8th grade teacher, and or maybe that's the problem. Maybe our 8th grade needs to act more like a 5th grade and do more like station work and and some instructional strategies that tend to work very, very well at the elementary. So that's a lot of the conversation that we're looking at and that's really what the next gen cadre is talking about is really looking at station rotation and flipping your classroom and really focusing on those two strategies, K through 12, and how does that possibly look like? What does that look like in your classroom? And we're doing a lot of that at Hibbard. We got a couple of teachers that have gone to conferences and they're trying that. We've got teachers embedded all over the corporation who are trying some things. Quite honestly, it is pretty exciting. It just that 5 to 8.
As far as
just
PD goes, is there any collaboration time between buildings, between dentists and tests?
Yeah. So this year, what we started was on Thursday, the first Thursday that we had, the last Thursday of the month, that would have been in September. We actually Skyped across buildings, and so we used
Link.
the link system or the business for Skype, or I don't know exactly
Thursdays
what it is, but anyway.
or Tuesday?
What's that?
Tuesdays or Thursdays?
On the Tuesday, it was I want to say it's the third Tuesday of the month. And so we're trying to use that time. I can't remember what day it was. But anyway, so the math teachers could actually Skype with the math teachers and have conversations across the district. So we're going to be doing that on a monthly basis just to, we had been, last year we pulled them in a couple of times to do some of that stuff, but with travel time and just lost the time doing that. So we're trying to utilize a blended approach even for professional development.
Right. I mean, it's one thing in the high school level when you have everyone who teaches freshman English is right there in the same hallway most of the time.
Yeah.
But
so I'm glad you asked that because, and again, that was really initiated by Stacy and working with working with Nicole to
in the years past, that had been one of the complaints with the teachers about not having the collaboration or the time to collaborate. So.
But I do think you're on it when you say that kids were so turned off by the rote basal. It's giving them more choice in what they're interested in reading and in doing and in learning, more differentiated instruction or whatever especially at the middle school level, because they're all over the place in interests, where at high school they start gearing more to what to fewer areas.
I'm really taking that approach pre-K all the way up.
Yeah.
Trying to really move in that direction. So, again, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Good.
Okay, board reports and old business. Just a reminder that tomorrow night's the board retreat, and I would say bring this information with you, maybe to look at, along with some other stuff I'll have.
Aaron, you had mentioned earlier, do you want to talk a little bit about the conference
I just
that we
want
were able to attend?
Probably Member Moore and Member Walton might want to say something also. Last Monday and Tuesday of last week was the ISBA fall conference in Indianapolis. I attended for one day. There were some good workshops. They're streamlining them now, not as many, but have a focus on it. I participated in the delegates assembly, as that is one of my roles on the board. There are some issues that will be coming up that we will learn about be presented to us at the fall regional dinners as well. Some of the changes in some of the state and national policies that are going to affect us. So details at 11. I'll see if either of the other two would like to say anything.
I attended some great workshops. A lot of school corporations thinking outside the box. School district up north, up by Hammond, very similar to ours, kind of in a manufacturing heavy community. Was really struggling. They implemented a advanced manufacturing program. They've got agreements with I do believe it's Rolls-Royce and Subaru through their, it's based through Project Lead the Way. They're also able to get 9 credit hours through some, can't remember, I think it's Purdue is where they get their credit hours through. And the kids are offered positions if they're qualified for it, starting at Subaru right out of high school at 68 grand starting, and Rolls Royce was actually like 83,000.
They hire him at 18.
Yeah, and the funniest thing, or not funny, I mean it's a legit problem. Their problem is keeping teachers.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they get a teacher trained to teach that curriculum,
Subaru
they're
hires
like,
him.
why am I teaching this and making half the money when I could make that at a...
Yeah.
So that was their biggest problem, and it was really interesting to see and listen to them how they really had a very, very poor public image, and they've got a high Latino population, and getting them to get this advanced manufacturing program in place, they fought all kinds of PR nightmares because a lot of the community was like, you're trying to put our kids in factories, this is all you think of our kids and everything else, and to get them to understand the advanced part of this, that it's not, you're not, putting part A into part B, all day long. It's the amount of CAD work and the, just the CNC work involved and the trig and
Programming.
yeah, absolutely. It was amazing and once the community realized what they were doing, it's just taken off like wildfire. So.
I had a fantastic time. For me, it was getting to know other people. And the experiences they go through. Oftentimes I thought, well, we go through a lot, but there's other school corporations that go through a whole lot more than what we did imagine. So that was really interesting. That I went to a lot of things about partnership and having partnerships with the community and how to develop those partnerships. And after I sat down with lunch with Todd, he told me about quite a few of them that we had. And I was impressed by that. Because I was thinking we need to do more partnering with other people, but we do have quite a few that we have, and I thought that was interesting as well. Some of it was a little Greek and over my head, but I learned a lot from what I have, and I appreciated being able to go.
Right, and as a reminder, I think you said it, the regional meeting is next Wednesday, so make sure you let Kim know if you're attending. So we'll move to preview of upcoming meeting and events.
So I want to remind you, tomorrow we have executive meeting at 4 o'clock for our board retreat. Executive committee, I think I already mentioned it to Dixie and Aaron, but Suzanne, with fall break next week, we need to meet Friday at 8:30 if at all possible on your schedule, and if we need to do that by phone, we can work through that as well, but if you guys would check your schedules so we can get the agenda set. The challenge also will be next week, obviously, with many people being out of the office during that time, is having things posted by Friday, but we'll work, and if there's an issue with that, I'll make sure I communicate that to the board. We'll work to make that happen. Also, next week, the registration is open for NSBA. I think most of you have communicated with Kim regarding that, but if there's been a change, or if you have not let her know yet, if you would do that by the end of this week so that she can get us registered, and we want to make sure that we get in and get our motel room set and everything that goes with it. Some information. And Karen, would you mind just speaking real quickly to what you'd like to see from the board members on that?
So as we discussed a month or two ago, we will have a work session on the bus replacement plan and all that entails, from the plan itself to funding for it. So I have compiled a short list of what I believe was part of the conversation that we will expect to have. There is a short survey if you'd like to fill that out for things that may be off the table automatically. I just wanted to rule those out so we don't spend a lot of time gathering information on topics that you are not interested in. And then the others, just look over those, ponder them for the next week. In the board update on next Friday, I will be requesting that if you've thought of anything else or need us to cover anything else, to get that information to Todd at your very earliest convenience, so that we can continue to work through that in preparation for that work session.
You want this information this evening, or?
The survey you can turn in with Kim before you leave if you want to. If there's nothing that you see that matters one way or the other, you're welcome to just disregard it. And I will proceed with the list that you have outlined.
Thank you.
Okay. Press conference? Nothing? Okay. Bell ringer.
What I'd like to celebrate this evening was identified a couple of years ago as a concern by the board as I was coming in, and that was with educational leadership and with professional development. And I think you heard constantly over and over tonight as we talked about student achievement is the culture that is present now and has continued to grow over the last couple of years with our administrators, with our teachers, using people from inside mixed with people from outside, really developing the experts within to where they can share the information with our teachers and with each other. The 8-step retreats that our teachers are going through on their own time, yes, they were paid, but they still were giving up Saturday weekend time or evening time to come in for that. So again, just the culture, that shift that we're seeing as we continue to look at what is in the best interest of our kids. So I just want to celebrate our teachers, our administrators, the board for their willingness to continue again to align our resources in such a way, and our central office administrators, coaches. When I go to the conference that we went to the other day, one of the things that I take great joy in is hearing the things that are happening in other districts and going, yeah, we're doing that. We're doing that probably better. And so that's just encouraging and reassuring. So congratulations and thank you to everyone involved with that.
All right. Meeting adjourned.
Kim, you get these, correct? Okay.
Bridget.
No, but it's like.
We are young, man.
Yes, it's a big one.
Suzanne, do you think 8:30 will work Friday?
It'll depend on the weather.
You're driving?
Brad and Debbie and Eric.
It's such a good development.
Good, Kim. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Thanks, Brad.
Nah.
I'll take it.
You want to give it to Kim? Either way, I can make it happen. But
Hours.